This week, it's a special Critiquing Comics, in which we discuss the latest issues of two series that we've previously discussed. Jason and I look at the second issue of Brandon Hayes' stories of his bipolar character Thready in Tuesday, focusing on the topic of hypersexuality. Then, Adam joins me to talk about the fourth installment of Emmanuel Filteau's dystopian future story, Tales from the Interface, as a rift grows between Gautier, who owes his life to the interface, and Clara, who's learning that life was better without the interface. First, if you appreciate the work we do on deconstructing comics and our other podcasts and want bonus content, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. Our monthly issue-by-issue look at 1960s Amazing Spider-Man comics is available to patrons, chipping in at least $4 a month. Check out our goals and rewards and pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
This is Jason.
This is Adam.
This is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo, Jason in Portland. How you doing?
I'm delightful, Tim. How you doing? I'm
okay. We are talking about the second part of a comic that we did cover the first part of, Thready, by Brandon Hayes.
This is his third time on the show, Brandon. He also had a book of outtakes that we did.
Oh, did we? Okay, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, this is the Brandon Hayes podcast. Welcome to the Brandon Hayes podcast. Not starring Brandon Hayes.
Yeah, that's right. Not too long ago, we did talk about something he did that was not Thready, and then he said, I got another Thready coming out. So this is the second installment of Thready, Tuesday. It's supposed to be like a week in the life of this guy who is bipolar, and Brandon is also bipolar. And Thready sees himself, I guess, as this like furry monster.
Well, that's an interesting question, because this issue broke that sort of perspective. But we'll get into it.
Okay. Yeah, is he seen that way by others or not? Yeah, we can talk about that. But in the comic, he is shown as kind of a furry monster who, in the first issue, was wearing this kind of elaborate mask most of the time. Mm-hmm. In this one, we see that without the mask, he looks kind of like Rolf the dog from the Muppets.
He was terrifying without the mask.
And I couldn't remember the first issue, and I didn't have a copy of it, so I listened to our podcast about it to refresh my memory. And in that one, his friend was giving him a ride, and his friend was with this woman who we took to be the friend's
romantic interest, yeah.
Wife or girlfriend, and it seemed to me that she and Thready were kind of flirting. You took it as more of a bonding moment, you said. Mm-hmm. And I suppose that could also be true, but in this issue they are having sex, so I think there was some flirtation there too.
Issue, they're having sex.
Pretty much, yeah.
So this issue, I think, is with the note that came along with it from Brandon. Is exploring the hypersexuality of bipolar people as something that may not be quite as understood or seen.
Yeah, he's just one of the lesser known symptoms of bipolar disorder, hypersexuality.
Yeah. So I think the female counterpart in this was also maybe bipolar, because they're both hypersexualized in this. But what interesting part to me that made me sort of like hit the brakes wasn't all the sex. I've seen that's out there. But she stops at some point and says, "You're not even human. You're just some animal that I'm fucking." And I had always taken it that Thready was sort of a anthropomorphic interpretation.
Anthropomorphic, yeah.
Yeah, what you said. Anthropomorphic ideation of how this character felt about himself, much like the character in My Favorite Thing is Monsters, where she's a little girl in Chicago but sees herself as this little werewolf character. I thought that was sort of the stand-in for Brandon's character. But here they cross the line and say, no, you're an animal and I'm having sex with an animal. And I thought, well, that's an interesting wrinkle, because I don't know where you go with that. I was not looking at this. I was looking at this as all the people were referring. That was an allegory for his bipolar. That maybe he feels like a monster, or he wants to hide behind a mask, to protect yourself. And if you're exploring something that's emotionally vulnerable, I think that's a great way to do it. I thought Emil Ferris in My Favorite Thing Is Monsters does that really, really well. And I thought that was what Brandon was going for. But we crossed the line there. We sort of broke the fourth wall. So now I have to read this as everyone sees Thready as an animal-like creature with a mask. And that does sort of change things for me. You?
Well, I mean, I took it to mean, like, when she said you're a furry monster, I felt like what she was really saying is you're bipolar, you're ill. And maybe it was just being presented as her saying you're a furry monster because in the comic he is. I was kind of reading it as that's not actually the words that she's saying. It's just being changed for the comic.
I think, but if she had said, like, you're not well or you're not physically ready for a relationship like this, that would have carried the allegory, right? That would have carried the illusion. I just felt like she called out, like, she's seeing what the audience sees in that moment. Or maybe you're right. Maybe it's half the other, or maybe I'm over intellectualizing a comic that is basically 20 pages of two people railing the hell out of each other.
Although, I mean, well, part of it is, but then she starts to kind of have second thoughts about it, and it's not clear why. Is it because she's cheating on another boyfriend, or is it because Thready is ill? I wasn't sure kind of why she kind of stops and says, what are we doing?
Well, I think to the reader's perspective, they got into it very, very quick.
Well, yeah, like the next day, literally.
Yeah. So their relationship escalated very, very quickly, and we as the audience are standing in going, if you've ever found yourself in a quick relationship, you may have second thoughts. So that part didn't bother me. I think if you're highly emotionally, if you're over-sexualized, you're probably over-emotionalized as well. So being like, oh my God, we have to do this. Wait, what are we doing? Oh my God, let's do it again. I sort of reading this put me in the mindset of somebody who is bipolar. So I think to that degree, Brandon was very successful. Out of context of the first issue and out of context of the note that Brandon passed along, I might not have quite gotten that.
The hypersexuality thing, yeah, same here. I mean, he kind of alerted me to it, so I was kind of on the lookout for it, and so okay, but yeah, the comic itself doesn't really lead you by the hand through that. You have to kind of be looking for it.
Yeah, without the accompanying thesis statement, I don't know that I would have had the same experience. But reading it with that thesis statement, I looked at it with different eyes and with a lot more sympathy and understanding than I had the first time around. I think reading this, when the whole thing is done and you're reading all these stories in a collection back to back, you will have the bipolar experience. I think Brandon is specifically engineering that. But the mechanics around indie comics is you have to do a little bit at a time, fund it, find an artist to draw it. And this book actually does have a different artist. Right.
Identified as James the Stanton.
James the Stanton.
Yeah, and he did the cover as well.
So it's not wildly different than what we got in the first issue, but maybe it's not quite as polished. Is what we got in the first issue.
Yeah. Now,
although it's hard to critique ejaculate on a toy.
Yeah, that was the part that I was really puzzling over. Like, what is this trying to say? Because we get this whole page of like a zooming in on that toy covered with semen, and then the fourth panel is just black. Okay, so but I didn't get what we were trying. Was that toy in the previous issue? I don't remember it.
I don't think it's. Is it Rosebud? Is that what you're asking? Are we doing a Rosebud here with ejaculate and toys? No, I just think you're meant to be like hyper focused. Like she's having this big emotional moment, and he's fixating on something really sort of juvenile and sort of mesmerizing. And it took me back to a time when I was a kid and I would focus on really weird things and miss the obvious in front of me. And by a kid, I mean like last year.
We're all young at heart, yes.
Yeah. I'm young in wallet.
Yeah, I know what you mean there, too.
Yeah, so I think if you could bring in more of the thesis statement, and I don't know how you do that in a way that's not clumsy. Maybe it's like an internal dialogue of Thready fixating on things, but then you'd have to have sort of like a running inner monologue that's contrasting the outside. And I would also like ask Brandon to really clarify, do people see Thready, like what are they visually seeing and what are we seeing? Is it the same thing or is it not? I didn't think it was.
Yeah, and then this part where he's like down on his knees, pleading with the woman who we now know is named Natalie. He's like pleading with her to be more of a partner to him. It's not just a roll in the hay. He wants it to be a really serious, close relationship. Although then she's not quite sure if he means he wants it to be romance or if it's just like supporting each other over the bipolar issue.
I think, again, this is playing to the bipolarness of like you met someone for a day, had a bunch of sex, and now you think they're the one.
Yeah, I took that to be part of the bipolar thing. Yeah, the hypersexuality or, yeah.
It creates like a little bit of madness because you're like, this is not healthy, normal behavior for anyone. Kids, don't get married to the first person you sleep with. Always marry your second wife first. That's my advice.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. All right, the new Love Show starring Tim and Jason. So I do feel like, and then there's something with the home life. We don't have to ruin everything. But so I really felt for Thready at the end of this. In the beginning, I was like, well, how bad can you feel for a guy having a bunch of sex? And then you're like, this is borderline obsessive. And then I think how that clouds their emotional judgment. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. But again, these are such quick little books. I think it'll really read well in a trade collection graphic novel. But that's not going to happen if everyone doesn't go out and support Thready's Kickstarters. So Brandon says he's got part 3 coming. The irony is it's probably going to take him 2 years to tell a week in the life of Thready. But hey, that's indie comics.
Yeah.
I'm lettering a book I wrote in 2016. Comics are glacially slow sometimes. At this level, at the indie level, it's real slow.
Yeah, so his page at the end, which I have to say, it's hard for me to read white on a black background. I start to get these ghosts in my eyes.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, he mentions the Kickstarter and the hypersexuality, but I don't know, I felt like a lot of this essay was, I have a lot to say, but I'm not going to say it right now. And I thought the essay could have been a lot shorter.
The essay could have had the essay should have been complimenting what we saw in a way that gave us information that wasn't on the page.
Yeah.
To help frame it, to make you feel different about it.
The very beginning does that, mentioning the hypersexuality, but then, yeah, I didn't really get anything more from it.
I would put the hypersexual definition after you read it, because you might be like, what am I reading? And then it gives you context. If you go into it looking for the clues, I found it more enjoyable as a reader the first time before, because I didn't read that stuff. I just jumped right in.
Well, I mean, that is at the end, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
The note that he sent over with us, I just read it first.
Oh, okay.
Then I read
his
that
email.
stuff.
I don't even remember what that said. Yeah, I read through this several times, like last night, this morning, but I didn't look back at the email again.
Well, it's very sensitive stuff. It's also it could also be taken very salaciously, or we could just snicker at the idea that someone is having sex in the comic book for X amount of pages. But I do think there's a thought behind it, and there's a good intention behind it. So I guess my other advice would be, I'd love to see a more consistent artist, like the same artists returning to this. 'Cause I think it would give it would carry it a little stronger.
Yeah, I know that can be tough with indie comics. You get who you can to draw your stuff, but
I know. I got a basement full of people I plucked off of DeviantArt.
Coming up, the relationship between Gautier and Clara falls apart as they find themselves at odds over the interface, the computer system dominating life in their version of the future. Adam and I discuss Tales from the Interface Issue 4. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support.
Sawate. My name is Stella, and I am the host of Batgirl to Oracle, the Barbara Gordon podcast. Batgirl to Oracle is a podcast dedicated to Barbara Gordon, the first woman to hold the mantle of Batgirl for an extended period of time, roughly 1967 to 1988. The goal of Batgirl to Oracle is to examine the character's history from her first appearance as Batgirl and continuing through her tenure as Oracle. Each episode looks at a vintage issue of Detective Comics or Batman, as well as other books like Justice League and Freedom Fighters, and modern issues of Batgirl and Birds of Prey. I also keep track of news involving Batgirl and other members of the Bat family, and I have a revolving series of segments like Babs in the Tube, which highlights appearances of Babs in TV and film, Shipper Spotlight, which looks at a variety of comic and pop culture couples, gives their history, and determines whether they are hot or not, Reading with Stella, which could be described as an audio drama, or just me reading a book that relates to Babs or doesn't, and of course, the mainstay literature recommendation. I have been blessed to interview writers Scott Beatty and Chuck Dixon on their Batgirl Year 1 work, Brian Q. Miller on his Batgirl run, Dwayne Swarzynski and Christy Marks on their separate Birds of Prey work, and the creators and actors of the Batgirl Spoiled, the web series. I hope to interview more creators and actors in the future. My goal, most importantly, is to make a fun, entertaining, and thoughtful show that people enjoy and from which they learn. Find the show online at thebatmanuniverse.net and iTunes, and follow the show on Facebook and Twitter at Batgirl to Oracle. Thank you, and fly on, Babs lovers.
Now I'm talking with Adam. Hello, Adam.
Hi, Tim. How's everything in Tokyo?
Yeah, same as usual. And Adam and I talked about Tales from the Interface number 3 a while back. That was in May 2021, episode 196. And Mulele and I had discussed the first issue in Critiquing Comics 136 back in 2018. I'm sure I read issue 2 at some point, but it seems like there wasn't an episode specifically about number 2. Maybe it was mixed in with the issue 3 discussion. Anyway, now we have issue 4, and I had to go back to issue 3 and read that again because I couldn't remember what was going on. And this issue just kind of picks up right where it left off, and there's no review or anything.
Yeah, I'm glad that I'm not the only one, and I'm also glad that you said this was almost exactly 2 years ago because it made me not worry about my memory. I was like, I don't remember any of this, but as I read it, it sort of came back to me. So I pretty much remember. Well, let me tell you what I remember, and you can tell me if that's accurate.
Okay.
So, if I recall correctly, they're living in this world where they can anytime they want, like, pop into a virtual reality world, and it's kind of like their Soma trip kind of thing. Like they can, just disappear from the real world and vanish into this fantasy world, and they can do whatever they want in there. And then I remember that there was some big evil corporation or something like that, if I recall correctly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then I remember kind of the final scene being them finding this kind of secret society that was like, getting back to kind of more tangible things like books and art and things that were not in this virtual space. Those are the like
pretty much, yeah. So our main characters are this couple, and his name is maybe Gautier. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. Her name is Clara, and I think it was in the second issue that Gautier died and was sort of reassembled and brought back to life by this guy Holloway, right, who's I guess sort of the leader of this corporation thing, or he's a leader of the interface. And it's still kind of fuzzy just what exactly the interface is. But Gautier feels, he owes a debt to Holloway for bringing him back to life. And he talked Clara into coming with him to this sort of demonstration or party that was crashed by a bunch of other people who had not been invited, and they were pretty much all wiped off the face of the earth for crashing the party. They have this sort of octopus-looking thing called Robopax. There are multiple of these Robopaxes who are used to take care of people that the interface doesn't like, I guess. And the invited guests were there because the interface was interested in hiring them. For what, we're still not quite sure. And Clara had found the archive, which is kind of outside of the interface, and the people there are trying to preserve history. They have a lot of books and stuff from the past that have been forgotten by those who live in the interface. So she's more skeptical of this whole job with the interface thing, and she feels like she doesn't know enough about it, and Gautier is just like jumping in head first. At the end of the last issue, she was kind of angry about that because he was not being cautious enough, not really understanding what this quote-unquote job is. Right.
So, and I think there were the people that were called like the elite, and these are like these really kind of top level. I mean, it's kind of like a game, right? They play a game, but it has some kind of real world repercussions or something. And I think the elite were like these top kind of killing machines or something. Am I
that may be. I'm not quite remembering that, but
I could be confusing some other stories that we've read on this, but hearing you say it back to me right now and having read issue 4, it makes me realize there are a lot of parallels to the Matrix trilogy. Calling it the interface, I think that's a very similar kind of thing to what the Matrix was supposed to be, right? That it was this way that humans engage with the world, but it's all artifice. It's not at all real. And then the real world, there's these people who would prefer to know the truth, and those are like the Morpheus and the Oracle or whatever from that story. So there's sort of a similar kind of thing going on here, where you have the people who want reality and are embracing that, and kind of bucking against this idea of you can be happier in the virtual world kind of thing. So it's one of those red pill, blue pill kind of things, isn't it?
Yeah, there are similarities in there. Yeah, like, it's a whole idea of like, don't be sucked in by society and just kind of allow yourself to be distracted by things that quote unquote they want to use to distract you from what's really going on. That whole kind of idea.
Yeah, so it is. Yeah, it's the red pill, blue pill thing, but like. Well, never mind. That you always hear like right wingers talking about taking the blue pill or whatever it is that they think is like understanding the world for what it really is, and not believing the fake news and all that kind of stuff. And yeah. Anyway, so let's get into this issue 4, because there are things that I really liked about it, and things that I have some little criticisms here and there, but I'm curious to see what you thought.
Okay. Yeah, so he kind of gets her to calm down and shows her the apartment that they would live in with him as an employee there. Then we see him for his integration, and it's like what he has to do is be strapped into a chair, and there are all these wicked-looking tools around that he's not even really noticing. He's got, I guess, like a virtual reality headset on. And the guy tells him, it can be a bit uncomfortable at first, but believe me, once in the game, you won't care. And so we don't actually see what happens, but when he comes back to Clara, it's 3 days later, and he doesn't realize it.
Yeah, and he still wants to play games.
Yeah,
right?
and he looks like he's got like bruises on his face.
Yeah.
And just seems a little goofier than he did before.
Yeah, my take on that is that, he's actually experiencing these things. Like they have all these tools, these instruments of torture that are like they're using on him and then sort of like blending it into the experience of the VR. So, because he's in like a combat simulator, it looks like, and all those tools look like they're things that would hurt you. And so, it makes me, I had two thoughts when I saw his bruised up face and stuff. One thought was that he had just left a VR goggles on so long that it had bruised his face.
Well, that could be.
That was my first thought. But my second thought was that they're actually using this kind of tool to experiment on him and maybe tweak the interface or something, like maybe they are, I don't know, doing different things to him physically in the real world and then through the interface making him feel like he's in this combat kind of situation or something. I'm not really sure, but it did remind me, the fact that he spent 3 days doing this, basically gaming for money, and then when he came back, he wanted to play games with his girlfriend or partner. It reminded me of, I used to work for a video game company. I worked for Hudson Soft back in the early 2000s, and I was working as a game tester, and we would actually sit and play games all day long, testing them and writing bug reports and stuff. And I remember being so shocked one of the first days that I was there, because on our lunch break, the guys put away the things that they're supposed to be testing on, and they got out a different system and started playing games during the break.
It becomes recreation then when they don't have to write down any notes about it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot like you and I listening to podcasts in our off time.
Yeah, I do a lot of that.
Yeah, so what my take on this issue is, because like you said, yeah, he does that. He comes back and then she's still feeling kind of misgivings about this. She leaves for a little while and she basically takes a bunch of mushrooms and goes on her own trip.
Yeah, she's up, with the archive people. This woman named Shay, who wears a Che Guevara hat.
Yeah.
And they show her these mushrooms that seem to give a better experience than anything that the interface has to offer.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's any message there or anything, but like I would much rather have like a VR kind of twisted experience than like a drug-induced out-of-body experience. But the weird thing about that was that his kind of combat simulator stuff ended up kind of coming into her, mushroom trip. At least it looked like some of the same.
Yeah, some of the same
visuals.
Kind of military stuff that he was envisioning.
Right.
Yeah, those same planes and the guy with the wings strapped to his back who's wearing like a Mysterio helmet. Yeah, I mean, it seems like she played that game with him before, so maybe that was influencing what she saw in the hallucination with the mushroom.
Yeah, it could be. So then I guess she, in this, mushroom trip, she has kind of a spiritual awakening or a spiritual like realization, right? That they have to go out and tell people about, they have to spread the word about this. They have to get people to know about books and especially to know about trees for some reason, right? Because there's like a cult that worships this one tree.
Well, yeah, because in this world, there's only one tree left. Mm-hmm. And yeah, when in the previous issue, she was looking at pictures of how things used to be, which was, worse than now. A lot of the trees that were in the picture were not very healthy looking, but there was more than one. That was the impressive thing about it to her.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird. It's kind of a cool idea that, like, obviously the real world is not, it's a post-apocalyptic kind of thing. They're eating bugs and rats and things like that. And most of the people are seeking out refuge in this interface, and they're not really engaging with the real world. And the past that they're kind of looking back to and saying, oh, this is the real world that we should be embracing, looks pretty awful as well. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. It's not like it's going to get better and like there's a better world waiting for them if they go this route of the archive. So
yeah.
Yeah, I didn't feel like there was a whole lot of story in this particular issue. It was a lot of these two kind of characters in their own different kind of alternate reality, and her trying to convince him, hey, like this is the real way, and him not going along with it and saying, no, my way is the way that we should be going because we owe this guy this debt. And then it just kind of concluded there like that, right?
Well, and she and the archive people, tried to spread the word, and everybody just sort of treated them like they were, Hare Krishnas, basically. The people out on the street handing out literature about their religion, and they were regarded in the same way. They were just like they were kooks.
Do you see Hare Krishnas anymore? I mean, I know that you don't see them because we live here, but like even in the U.S. at the airports and stuff where you used to find them, I don't see them anymore.
I don't think they are the force that they used to be. No, I don't know. I don't know if any of them still show up anywhere or not. But
yeah, that was like a thing. That was like it was like a meme before memes. I think I remember like people always joking about Hare Krishnas, and I did remember seeing them. It was typically at the airport and places like that. But
like 1970s Bob Hope specials, they'd come up or something. Or, Johnny Carson would make jokes about Hare Krishnas.
Yeah.
Or maybe a little later, the Unification Church.
Oh, right. Right. I guess that's different. That's a big news story here for very different reasons now, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they still exist, but I don't think Americans talk about them anymore, like we did in maybe the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, that's true. You never hear about the Moonies anymore.
No. Anyway, so then they get the Robopaxes sicked on them, and one of the archive guys gets killed.
Mm-hmm.
And then she goes back to Gautier, and all he wants to do is play the game, so she says farewell. So it sounds like she's permanently dumping him now because he's kind of too focused just on games and not on her or anything else.
Right. And it makes me wonder if there's something coming up in the future where he's going to be pit against her, because he's kind of the story ends with him being advanced in the company and becoming an elite, right? And she's left him to go with the archive people. So it leads me to believe maybe in future issues he's going to come back and have to actually be against her, or possibly. So like I said, I didn't feel there was a whole lot of story progression in this issue, other than the big fact that she left this guy who she's been with for the first 4 issues.
Mm-hmm.
But it was sort of done without any fanfare. She just kind of like, okay, later. It wasn't like this big emotional moment or anything. So,
but yeah, I mean, as far as the comic itself, I mean, it seemed like there was a lot in there because it's a 53-page PDF. It's a little, it's twice as long as your normal floppy comic. So there were a lot of things that happened. I think the story did advance somewhat because he's, getting sucked into this, and she's, there's a rift between them now because they've gone off in opposite directions, like you said. So, yeah, it does kind of foreshadow that they're going to be in opposition to each other at some point.
Yeah, perhaps. I'm sort of curious to see what's going to happen. Like I said, it's been 2 years since we'd read the last installment of this, so it was sort of hard for me to piece everything back together. I think if I read it all in one lump, like one go, it would probably be a lot easier to follow maybe. But like you said, I think that it's definitely not a bad story. It's interesting. But compared to previous issues, I felt like there was a lot more kind of development in the story compared to this particular issue, but which is not necessarily a criticism of this issue, because not every, I actually like stories to breathe and have some take their time in the pacing. So that's not necessarily a criticism of it so much as just that I didn't feel like this one really got that much story out. So.
But yeah, the art is good. I did find a few typos, but
was it loser spelled with two O's?
Yeah, that was one I definitely noticed.
Yeah,
you're a loser.
But this is a press copy, so hopefully he'll have time to correct these before it goes to print. So about the art, there's a few things. So I remember in the previous issues being impressed with the colors. There's some kind of cool techniques that the artist uses for color. In this one too, like you said, there's a bruise on his face, and that's kind of really well done. It's like this, it really looks just like a little color splotch, but it doesn't, it's very subtle and, but still noticeable that you know something's wrong with his face. And I do feel like color helps to kind of create the mood. And also, because this issue has so much in the fantasy space, you know, whether that be VR or hallucinogenics, it has a lot of kind of bright and interesting colors that convey that. And so, and none of the colors are clashing with each other necessarily. So I do feel like there was a really good use of color in this comic book. And my only criticism really about the artwork is that some of the anatomy, especially feet, are not always pointing in the same plane when there's more than one character standing there. Some of the feet are sort of in a different plane, or they're pointed in a different direction. There's some stuff like that where like the anatomy doesn't quite fit where it's supposed to be, you know, or the scale or the foreshortening and stuff is not quite right. There's a few things like that where it's not quite right, but overall the art is very accomplished, and there is no point in the story where I felt like it was distracting from the story or anything like that. So it, you know, it's all framed right and the pages move in a nice way and stuff like that. But there's just a few little anatomy things that did stick out to me.
Yeah, I see what you mean about the feet. I'm looking at page 17, panel 4, where Clara is walking, and yeah, her ankles seem to be sort of bent at weird angles.
Yeah. There's things like that for sure.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, they're not necessarily distracting from the story, but they did stick out to me. And I think that that's because they're the type of things that they're probably the same art mistakes that I would make, and then I would catch them on myself later on when looking back at my work, you know? So I think that's part of the reason why it stuck out in particular to me. But yeah, the art and the story, it's all, you know, accomplished. It's done by somebody who clearly knows what they're doing. So,
anything else?
I don't have much to add. I would be curious. Now, I think that we'll probably get the next installment, probably book 5, maybe in 2 years from now. So, I will make this promise. If you do send us your next book, you know, issue number 5, I will go back and read issue 4 to remind myself of what happened up until this point, so that I have a more informed opinion.
If you've enjoyed this week's show or any other Deconstructing Comics or Critiquing Comics episodes, tell your friends. Share your favorite episodes on your social media. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube by clicking our social media buttons at deconstructingcomics.com. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it here on Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Kumar and I discuss the latest from our friend Chad in Amsterdam. Issue 2 of The Re-Up, the story of how Chad became a pot dealer 20 years ago, and Magilla Sunday Funnies, an anthology project organized by Chad with an unusually high level of quality control on the various one-page comics included. That's all next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.